Sarah Mitchell walked into the crowded coffee shop on a quiet Tuesday morning, her worn sneakers squeaking slightly against the polished floor. She wore simple jeans and a faded gray sweatshirt, her dark hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. Nothing about her appearance suggested the warrior she truly was. To everyone around her, she looked like any other woman grabbing her morning coffee before starting her day. The line moved slowly, giving Sarah time to scan the menu board above the counter. She had just returned from an 8-month deployment overseas, and all she wanted was a normal cup of coffee in a normal place with normal people. The Navy had given her 2 weeks of leave, and she planned to spend it quietly, visiting her hometown and reconnecting with the peaceful life she rarely experienced. Behind her, 3 men in expensive business suits entered the shop, talking loudly about their latest real estate deals. Their voices carried across the small space, demanding attention from everyone present. The tallest one, a man named Derek with slicked back hair and an oversized watch, laughed boisterously at his own joke. His companions, Mike and Jason, joined in, their laughter echoing off the walls. Sarah barely noticed them at first. She had learned long ago to tune out unnecessary noise, focusing only on what mattered. But as the line inched forward, the men moved closer behind her, their conversation growing increasingly obnoxious. Derek was bragging about closing $1 million deal when he accidentally bumped into Sarah. His expensive coffee sloshed slightly in his hand, though none of it spilled. Instead of apologizing, he looked down at her with immediate annoyance, as if she had somehow been in his way. "Watch where you're standing," he said sharply, his tone dripping with contempt. Sarah turned slightly, meeting his eyes with a calm expression. "You bumped into me," she said quietly, her voice steady and even. There was no anger in her words, just a simple statement of fact. Derek's face reddened. He clearly wasn't used to being corrected, especially not by someone he perceived as beneath him. His eyes traveled over her worn clothing and casual appearance, and a sneer formed on his lips. "Excuse me," he said, his voice rising. "Do you know who I am?" Sarah remained silent, turning back toward the counter. She had no interest in engaging with someone looking for a fight. In her years of service, she had faced enemies who actually wanted to kill her. A rude businessman in a coffee shop was barely worth acknowledging. But Derek wasn't finished. He exchanged glances with his friends, who smirked in anticipation of whatever was coming next. "I asked you a question," Derek continued, stepping closer. "You should learn some respect. Maybe if you spent less time at the gym trying to look tough and more time on your appearance, you'd understand how to behave in public." Several people in the coffee shop turned to look. Some seemed uncomfortable with the confrontation, while others appeared curious about what would happen next. The barista at the counter glanced over nervously, unsure whether to intervene. Sarah took a slow breath, her military training kicking in automatically. "Stay calm, assess the situation. Don't escalate unless necessary." She had dealt with far worse than verbal insults. In her mind, she was already analyzing Derek and his friends, noting their body language, their positioning, their level of actual threat. The conclusion was simple. They were bullies who had never faced real consequences for their behavior. "I'm just trying to get coffee," Sarah said, still not raising her voice. "I'm not looking for trouble." Jason, one of Derek's friends, laughed mockingly. "Look at her trying to act all calm and tough. I bet she thinks she's some kind of fighter or something." He made exaggerated martial arts gestures, and Mike joined in the laughter. Derek leaned in closer, invading Sarah's personal space. "Let me give you some advice, sweetheart. Know your place. This isn't some dive bar where you can act however you want. This is where successful people come, and you clearly don't belong here." The woman standing ahead of Sarah in line turned around, her expression a mix of shock and sympathy. "Leave her alone," she said to Derek. "She hasn't done anything to you." Derek barely glanced at the woman. "Mind your own business, lady. I'm teaching someone a lesson about respect." Sarah finally turned to face Derek fully, her posture relaxed but somehow commanding. Her eyes, which had seemed tired and distant moments before, now held a sharp intensity that made Derek unconsciously take a small step back. "I served 8 years in the United States Navy," Sarah said quietly, her voice carrying a weight that silenced the nearby conversations. "I've been deployed to some of the most dangerous places in the world. I've earned more respect than you could possibly imagine. But I don't need to prove anything to you in a coffee shop." Derek recovered from his momentary hesitation and laughed loudly, looking at his friends for support. They joined in immediately. though their laughter sounded slightly forced. "The Navy?" Derek said mockingly. "What did you do, file paperwork? Type up reports? My assistant could do that." He looked around the shop, playing to his audience. "Everyone can claim they served these days. It doesn't mean anything." Mike chimed in, emboldened by Derek's continued aggression. "Yeah, I bet you sat behind a desk the whole time, eating donuts and pretending to be important." Sarah's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. She had spent years training to become one of the first female Navy SEALs, enduring physical and mental challenges that would have broken most people. She had carried wounded teammates under fire, completed missions in conditions that seemed impossible, and earned the respect of some of the toughest warriors in the world. But she had also learned that some battles weren't worth fighting. "Believe what you want," Sarah said, turning back toward the counter. But Derek wasn't satisfied. He had an audience now, and he was enjoying the attention. He reached out and grabbed Sarah's shoulder, spinning her back around to face him. "Don't walk away from me when I'm talking to you," he said, his voice turning threatening. "Someone needs to teach you some manners." The coffee shop went completely silent. Even the espresso machine seemed to quiet down. Everyone present could feel that something significant was about to happen, though most of them couldn't have explained exactly what had changed in the atmosphere. Sarah looked down at Derek's hand on her shoulder, then back up at his face. When she spoke, her voice was soft but carried an unmistakable edge. "Take your hand off me." "Now." Derek laughed, but there was a slight uncertainty in his eyes now. He had expected her to back down, to apologize, to recognize his dominance. Instead, she stood perfectly still, waiting with the patience of someone who had faced far worse threats than an angry businessman. "Or what?" Derek challenged, his pride not allowing him to back down in front of his friends and the watching crowd. The tension in the coffee shop had reached a breaking point. Derek's hand remained on Sarah's shoulder, his fingers gripping tighter as he waited for her response to his challenge. His friends stood behind him, their earlier confidence now mixed with a growing sense that perhaps they had pushed too far. Sarah moved with sudden precision that caught everyone off guard. In less than a second, she had grabbed Derek's wrist, applied pressure to a specific point, and twisted just enough to make him release her shoulder immediately. The movement was so smooth and controlled that most people barely saw it happen. They only saw Derek stumble backward slightly, his face contorted in unexpected pain. "I asked you nicely," Sarah said, releasing his wrist just as quickly as she had grabbed it. "Don't touch people without permission." Derek clutched his wrist, his face flushed with embarrassment and anger. He had been humiliated in front of his friends and a room full of strangers. For someone who built his identity on dominance and control, this was unacceptable. "You're going to regret that," Derek snarled, stepping forward again. "Do you have any idea who you're messing with? I could buy and sell people like you. I know lawyers, judges, police officers. I'll make your life a living hell." Mike and Jason flanked Derek, trying to look intimidating. Mike puffed out his chest and cracked his knuckles theatrically. "You think you're tough because you learned some basic self-defense moves?" Derek's right. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." Sarah remained calm, her hands relaxed at her sides. She had assessed the situation the moment Derek touched her. Three men, all in decent physical shape but with no real combat training. They relied on intimidation and social power, not actual fighting skills. In a real confrontation, it would be over in seconds. But Sarah had no intention of starting a fight in a public place over something so trivial. "I don't want any trouble," Sarah repeated, her voice still measured and calm. "I just want my coffee. Let's all move on with our day." The barista, a young man named Kevin, finally found his voice.
"Hey everyone, let's just calm down."
"Sir," he addressed Derek, "maybe you should—" "Shut up," Derek snapped at him. "This doesn't concern you. Just make the coffee and stay out of it." An older gentleman sitting at a table near the window stood up. He was probably in his 60s, wearing a veteran's cap with various pins and patches. His weathered face showed concern as he walked toward the confrontation. "Son," he addressed Derek, his voice firm but not aggressive. "I think you should listen to the lady and move on. There's no need for this." Derek spun toward the older man, his anger finding a new target. "Oh great, another hero wannabe. What are you, her grandfather? Why don't you sit back down before you hurt yourself, old man?" The veteran's jaw tightened, but before he could respond, Sarah spoke up. "Sir, thank you, but it's okay. I can handle this." She met the older man's eyes and gave him a slight nod. a gesture of respect between people who understood service. The veteran nodded back, recognizing something in Sarah that Derek and his friends couldn't see. He returned to his seat but remained watchful, ready to intervene if needed. Jason decided it was his turn to contribute. "You know what your problem is?" he said to Sarah, circling around to her side. "You think being in the military makes you special, but nobody cares about that anymore. You're just another person with a boring job who couldn't make it in the real world." Several people in the shop gasped at this comment. Even those who hadn't been paying attention before were now fully focused on the confrontation. A woman with 2 young children quickly ushered them toward the door, not wanting them to witness whatever was about to happen. Sarah's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. She had heard similar comments before from people who had never served, who couldn't possibly understand the sacrifices involved. Usually she let such comments slide. But standing in this coffee shop, being harassed by 3 men who had contributed nothing to anyone but themselves, she felt a small spark of anger beginning to kindle. "You don't know anything about my job," Sarah said, her voice taking on a harder edge. "You don't know what I've done or what I've sacrificed. And honestly, I don't need you to understand or respect it. But you will leave me alone." Derek laughed mockingly. "Or what? You'll what? Fight all 3 of us, please? You might have gotten lucky with 1 move, but you're outnumbered. And when this is over, I'll make sure you're arrested for assault. I have witnesses who'll say you attacked me." Mike nodded enthusiastically. "That's right. We all saw her grab you," Derek, completely unprovoked. "Actually," a woman's voice called out from the back of the shop, "I recorded the whole thing on my phone." A young woman in her 20s held up her device, her screen clearly showing the recording in progress. "I got everything, including him touching her first and threatening her." Several other people in the shop immediately pulled out their phones as well, some having already been recording. The modern instinct to document everything was working in Sarah's favor. Derek's confidence wavered for a moment, but he quickly recovered. "Fine, cameras or not, you're nothing. You're nobody. Look at you. Dressed like a homeless person in a place where people with actual success come. You're pathetic." Sarah had endured months of verbal and physical abuse during her SEAL training. Instructors had screamed in her face, questioned her abilities, and pushed her to the absolute limits of human endurance. She had been cold, wet, exhausted, and in pain for weeks at a time. She had proven herself in ways that these men could never comprehend. Their words meant nothing to her, but she also understood that sometimes silence was more powerful than any response. So she simply stared at Derek, her eyes steady and unwavering, saying nothing at all. This silent response seemed to unnerve Derek more than any comeback could have. He shifted his weight, glanced at his friends, then back at Sarah. "What, now you have nothing to say? Cat got your tongue?" The coffee shop manager, who had been in the back room during the initial confrontation, finally emerged. She was a woman in her 40s named Patricia, and she immediately assessed the situation with experienced eyes. "Gentlemen," she addressed Derek and his friends, her voice professional but firm, "I'm going to have to ask you to leave. You're disturbing my other customers," Derek whirled on her. "Excuse me? We're regulars here. We spend more money in one visit than she probably makes in a week. You should be asking her to leave." Patricia crossed her arms. "I don't care how much you spend. You're harassing another customer, and that's not acceptable. Please leave now or I'll call the police." "Call them," Derek said defiantly. "I'd love to explain to the police how this woman assaulted me." Patricia pulled out her own phone. "I have security cameras throughout the shop. They record audio too. So please, let's call the police and review the footage together. I'm sure they'll be very interested in seeing who touched who first and who made threats." Derek's face went pale. His earlier bravado crumbled as he realized that his usual tactics weren't working. Derek looked at Patricia with disbelief, clearly not accustomed to having his behavior challenged by anyone, especially not by someone he considered beneath him in the service industry. His face cycled through several emotions: shock, anger, and finally a calculating look as he tried to find another angle to maintain control of the situation. "You're really going to side with some random stranger over regular customers?" Derek asked, his voice taking on a condescending tone. "Do you know how business works? We come here every week. We bring in other clients. We probably account for thousands of dollars of your revenue, and you're willing to throw that away for her?" Patricia's expression remained unchanged. "Yes, now please leave or I will call the police." Jason stepped forward, trying a different approach. Look, maybe we all just got off on the wrong foot. How about we all calm down and we'll buy everyone in the shop a coffee? No harm, no foul. We can all forget this happened. Sarah shook her head slightly. I don't need you to buy me anything. I just need you to leave me alone. Mike, who had been quieter than the others, suddenly spoke up. You know what? I'm getting tired of this. Derek, let's just go. She's not worth our time. He seemed genuinely uncomfortable with how far things had escalated, perhaps having more sense than his companions. But Derek wasn't ready to back down. His ego had been bruised and he needed to salvage some sense of victory. No, I'm not leaving until she apologizes for assaulting me and for her disrespectful attitude. The veteran who had spoken earlier stood up again, this time with more authority. Son, I'm a retired Marine and I can tell you right now you're making a fool of yourself. That young lady has shown more restraint and professionalism in the last 10 minutes than you've probably shown in your entire life. Take your friends and leave while you still have some dignity. Derek spun toward the veteran, his face reddening. Another military person. Why am I not surprised? You people all stick together, acting like you're better than everyone else. Well, I've got news for you. Your service doesn't impress me. It doesn't make you special. It's just a job and not even a particularly impressive one. The shop fell completely silent. Even Derek's friends looked uncomfortable now. Insulting one veteran might be overlooked by some, but insulting a retired Marine in front of witnesses was something else entirely. Several other customers stood up, their body language showing clear disapproval of Derek's words. Sarah placed a gentle hand on the veteran's arm as he stepped forward. It's okay, sir. He doesn't know any better. Derek latched onto this comment. Oh, I don't know any better? That's rich coming from someone who probably couldn't cut it in the real world. So you joined the military where they tell you what to do every second of every day. Let me guess. You came from a poor family, had no better options, and needed the government to take care of you. Kevin, the young barista, finally spoke up with more confidence. Man, you need to stop. Like seriously, you're way out of line. Stay out of this, coffee boy, Derek snapped. Stick to making lattes and leave the adult conversations to people who actually matter. Sarah could feel the anger radiating from everyone around her. The entire coffee shop had turned against Derek and his friends, but Derek seemed oblivious to this fact. He was so focused on winning this confrontation that he couldn't see he had already lost in every way that mattered. I'll tell you what, Derek said, a cruel smile spreading across his face. Since you military types love challenges so much, let's make this interesting. I bet you couldn't last one day in my world. The real world where actual skills and intelligence matter, where you can't just follow orders and expect to succeed. Sarah tilted her head slightly, studying Derek with curiosity. What exactly do you do? Derek's chest puffed with pride. I'm a commercial real estate developer. I close multi-million-dollar deals. I negotiate with some of the most powerful people in this city. I make more money in a month than you probably see in a year. That's the real world, sweetheart, not playing soldier in some desert somewhere. And that makes you better than people who serve? Sarah asked, her tone genuinely curious rather than confrontational. It makes me smarter, Derek replied. Anyone can be trained to follow orders. It takes real talent, real intelligence to do what I do, to build wealth, to create opportunities, to actually contribute to society in a meaningful way. The retired Marine made a sound of disgust. Unbelievable. Young man, people like her are the reason you get to stand here and spout this nonsense. They protect the freedom that allows you to build your little real estate empire. Derek waved his hand dismissively. Oh, please, spare me the patriotic speech. Nobody's threatening our freedom. That's just propaganda to make people feel better about a career choice that requires no real skill. A middle-aged woman who had been sitting quietly in the corner stood up, her voice shaking with emotion. My son was in the Navy. He died serving this country 5 years ago. How dare you belittle what he and people like this young woman do? Derek turned to her, and for a moment it seemed like he might show some remorse, but instead he doubled down. I'm sorry for your loss, but that doesn't change the facts. Your son made a choice and unfortunately it didn't work out. That's not my fault and it doesn't make military service some sacred calling. Multiple people gasped. Mike grabbed Derek's arm. Dude, too far. Way too far. We need to leave right now. But Derek shook him off. No, I'm tired of everyone acting like military people are heroes just for existing. Real heroes are the people who build this country's economy, who create jobs, who actually make things happen in the real world. Sarah had remained calm throughout the entire confrontation, but something shifted in her demeanor now. Not anger exactly, but a firm resolve. "You want to know what I did in the Navy?" she asked quietly. "I really don't care," Derek said dismissively. "I think you should know," Sarah continued, her voice calm but carrying undeniable authority, "because you're making assumptions about things you don't understand. You think military service is easy? You think it requires no skill? You think anyone can do it?" Derek crossed his arms. "That's exactly what I think," Sarah nodded slowly. "I was a Navy SEAL, one of the first women to make it through the program. Do you know what that means?" For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Derek's face. Even someone as ignorant as him had heard of Navy SEALs. They were legendary, even among people who knew nothing about the military. "You're lying," Derek said, but his voice lacked conviction. Sarah reached into her pocket and pulled out her wallet. She extracted a card and held it up. It was her military ID showing her rank and designation. Several people nearby leaned in to see it, and those who could read it murmured in surprise. "I went through 6 months of the most brutal training imaginable," Sarah said, her voice steady. "I was cold, wet, exhausted, and in pain every single day. I completed missions in conditions you couldn't survive for an hour. I carried wounded teammates under enemy fire. I made decisions where people's lives hung in the balance. I served with some of the bravest, most skilled people on this planet." Derek stared at the ID, his face going pale. The coffee shop had gone completely silent. Everyone stared at Sarah's military ID, then at her face, then back at the ID. The contrast between this ordinary-looking woman in worn clothes and the extraordinary credentials she held was almost impossible to process for most people in the room. Derek took a step backward, his earlier confidence evaporating. That's not possible. "Women can't be SEALs." "Women couldn't be SEALs," Sarah corrected him gently. Past tense. "The policy changed. I was part of the first group of women to make it through the program. It took me 3 attempts to pass the initial screening, and another 6 months of training that had a 90% failure rate. I was one of 2 women who made it through that year." The retired Marine walked over and looked at the ID himself. His weathered face broke into a smile of genuine respect. "Well, I'll be damned. Ma'am, it's an honor." He extended his hand and Sarah shook it firmly. "The honor is mine, sir," she replied. "Semper Fi." "Ura," the Marine responded, his voice thick with emotion. Jason and Mike were now openly uncomfortable. Mike pulled at Derek's arm again. "Derek, seriously, we need to go. Right now." But Derek's face was going through a complicated series of expressions. Shock, disbelief, embarrassment, and then surprisingly anger. Rather than apologizing or backing down gracefully, he seemed to be getting more upset. "So what?" Derek said, his voice rising. "So you have some fancy title. That doesn't give you the right to assault people or act superior to everyone else." Patricia, the manager, stepped forward. "Sir, that's enough. I'm calling the police now. You can explain your behavior to them." "Fine, call them," Derek said, though his bravado sounded hollow now. "I still haven't done anything wrong." She grabbed me first. The young woman who had been recording held up her phone. "I have the whole thing right here. You touched her first. You refused to leave her alone. You made threats, and you insulted not just her but every person who's ever served in the military." Derek's face flushed red again. "I have freedom of speech. I can say whatever I want." "Freedom of speech doesn't mean freedom from consequences," the retired Marine said firmly. "You can say what you want, but people can also judge you for it. And son, you've been judged and found wanting by everyone in this room." Sarah put her ID back in her wallet and turned to Patricia. "Ma'am, I appreciate you standing up for me, but I don't think we need to involve the police. I just want to get my coffee and leave. These gentlemen can do whatever they want." Patricia looked at Sarah with admiration. "You're sure?" "Because I have no problem calling the police. This kind of behavior shouldn't be tolerated." "I'm sure," Sarah said. "I've dealt with worse. Much worse." Derek seized on this as some kind of victory. "See, she doesn't want the police involved because she knows she's wrong. She grabbed my wrist and that's assault no matter what her excuse is." Kevin, the barista, shook his head in disbelief. "Dude, do you not understand what just happened? You insulted a Navy SEAL. You disrespected her service. You made fun of veterans. And you're still acting like you're the victim?" "I didn't know she was a SEAL," Derek protested. "She didn't tell me. How was I supposed to know?" Sarah turned back to face Derek, her expression neutral. Would it have mattered? Would you have treated me differently if I had been wearing my uniform? Or would you have found some other reason to be cruel? Derek opened his mouth, then closed it. The honest answer was clear to everyone in the room, including himself. That's what I thought, Sarah said quietly. You didn't insult me because of anything I did or didn't tell you. You insulted me because you thought you could, because you thought I was someone who couldn't or wouldn't fight back, someone you could bully without consequences. Mike finally found his voice. Look, on behalf of all of us, I'm sorry. This got way out of hand. Derek, Jason, we're leaving now. He physically grabbed Derek's arm and started pulling him toward the door. Derek resisted. I'm not apologizing to her. I didn't do anything that wrong. She's blowing this all out of proportion. The woman whose son had died in the Navy stood up, tears streaming down her face. My son would have been proud to serve alongside someone like her. You should be ashamed of yourself. For the first time, Derek seemed genuinely affected by someone's words. He looked at the crying mother, and something in his expression softened slightly. But his pride still wouldn't let him back down completely. I'm sorry about your son, Derek said to the woman, his voice slightly quieter. But that doesn't change the fact that this situation got blown out of proportion. Sarah watched Derek carefully. She had dealt with many different types of people in her years of service. Some were cowards who folded immediately under pressure. Some were brave individuals who rose to any challenge. And some were like Derek, people so insulated by privilege and ego that they couldn't recognize their own faults even when confronted with overwhelming evidence. Derek, Sarah said, using his name for the first time. I'm going to give you some advice and you can take it or leave it. Stop seeing other people as inferior to you. Stop judging people based on their appearance or their job. You never know who you're talking to or what they've been through. Today you happen to insult someone who had the training and restraint not to respond the way you probably deserved. Next time you might not be so lucky. Derek stared at her, his jaw working as he fought between his pride and the growing realization that he had made a terrible mistake. Is that a threat? He asked, but without the earlier aggression. It's advice, Sarah replied, from someone who's seen what happens when people underestimate others. It never ends well for the person doing the underestimating. Jason, who had been relatively quiet throughout most of the confrontation, stepped forward. She's right, Derek, we messed up. We all messed up. We should apologize and leave. Derek looked at his friend with betrayal on his face. Are you serious right now? You're taking her side? I'm taking the side of not being a complete jerk, Jason said. Look around, man. Everyone here thinks we're wrong. Your behavior today was wrong. Just admit it and let's go. The entire coffee shop watched this internal drama play out. Some people had their phones out, still recording. Others simply stared, waiting to see how this would resolve. The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Sarah decided to make it easier for everyone. I'm going to go wait outside for my coffee. Derek, Mike, Jason, I hope you all have a good rest of your day. I hope you learned something from this. And I hope next time you see someone in worn clothes or someone who looks ordinary to you, you'll remember that appearances don't tell you anything about a person's value or their story. She walked to the counter where Kevin quickly prepared her coffee. It's on the house, he said quietly. And thank you for your service. That's not necessary, Sarah said, reaching for her wallet. Please, Kevin insisted. It's the least I can do. Sarah accepted with a small smile. Thank you. As she walked toward the door, Derek suddenly called out. Wait. Sarah stopped at the door and turned back toward Derek. The entire coffee shop held its breath, wondering what would happen next. Derek stood in the middle of the room, his expensive suit somehow looking less impressive now, his confident posture deflated. Derek started, then stopped. The words seemed to catch in his throat. Years of arrogance and entitlement fought against the undeniable reality that he had been wrong. Terribly wrong, and everyone knew it. Mike and Jason stood on either side of him, both looking exhausted by the entire situation. The other customers watched with a mixture of curiosity and hope that perhaps Derek might finally show some genuine remorse. I was out of line, Derek finally said, though the words sounded forced, as if someone had to physically pull them out of him. I shouldn't have touched you or said those things. Sarah studied him for a moment. She had heard many apologies in her life, both genuine and fake. This one fell somewhere in between. Derek wasn't sorry for what he had done, not really. He was sorry that it had turned out badly for him. Sorry that he had been embarrassed. Sorry that his usual tactics hadn't worked, but he wasn't sorry enough to have truly learned anything. Apology accepted, Sarah said simply. Because holding grudges wasn't worth her time or energy. She had learned long ago that some people would never change, and it wasn't her responsibility to fix them. She pushed open the door and stepped outside into the cool morning air. The sunlight felt good on her face after the stifling atmosphere of the confrontation. She took a sip of her coffee and started walking down the street, putting the entire incident behind her. But the story didn't end there. Inside the coffee shop, as soon as Sarah left, the atmosphere exploded into conversation. People who had witnessed the confrontation couldn't stop talking about what they had seen. The young woman who had recorded everything immediately posted it to social media with the caption, "These entitled jerks insulted a Navy SEAL in a coffee shop. Watch what happens." The retired Marine walked up to Derek, who was still standing in the middle of the room looking lost. "Son," the Marine said, his voice firm but not unkind, "I'm going to give you the same advice I gave my own children. Being successful in business doesn't make you a good person. Having money doesn't make you better than anyone else. And treating people with disrespect will eventually come back to haunt you." Derek nodded numbly, not really hearing the words. He was too busy processing everything that had happened. His friends grabbed him and finally managed to pull him out of the coffee shop. Once they were on the sidewalk, Mike turned on Derek. "What the hell was that? You completely lost it in there." "I didn't know she was a SEAL," Derek protested weakly. "That's not the point," Jason exclaimed. "You shouldn't have treated her that way, regardless of who she was. You were rude, aggressive, and honestly, you were acting like a complete bully." Derek felt his anger rising again. "Oh, so now you're both against me too? Great, just great." "We're not against you," Mike said, frustration evident in his voice. "We're trying to help you see that your behavior was unacceptable." That woman showed incredible restraint. If she had wanted to, she probably could have put all three of us in the hospital without breaking a sweat. Derek walked away from his friends, pulling out his phone to call his driver. He wanted to forget this entire morning had ever happened, but as the three men stood on the sidewalk, several people who had been in the coffee shop walked past them, shaking their heads in disgust. One older man stopped and looked Derek directly in the eye. "You should be ashamed of yourself, young man. I served in Vietnam and I saw boys younger than you die protecting people like you. Show some respect." Derek felt his face burning. He turned away without responding, desperate to escape the judgment that seemed to be coming from all directions. His phone buzzed with a notification. Then another. Then several more in quick succession. "What now?" he muttered, opening his social media app. His stomach dropped when he saw his name trending locally. The video from the coffee shop had been shared hundreds of times already, and it was spreading fast. The comments were brutal. Entitled, "Rich Guy Bullies Veteran in Coffee Shop. This is Derek Morrison, real estate developer. Let his company know what you think of his behavior." Imagine insulting a Navy SEAL and thinking you're the victim. Someone needs to humble this man. Derek's hand shook as he scrolled through the comments. His business page was being flooded with angry messages. His personal profile was getting tagged in hundreds of posts. The video had been viewed thousands of times in just the few minutes since it had been posted. "Guys," Derek said, his voice hollow, "we have a problem." Mike and Jason looked at their own phones and saw the same thing. The video was everywhere. Their faces were clearly visible. Their names were being mentioned. The internet had done its work with frightening speed, identifying all three of them and connecting them to their businesses and social profiles. Jason's phone rang. It was his wife. "Jason, what is this video everyone is sending me? Please tell me this isn't you." Mike received a text from his business partner. "Call me immediately. We need to talk about damage control." Derek's phone rang next. It was his father, who was also his business partner in their real estate firm. "My office now. We need to discuss your behavior this morning." The three men stood on the sidewalk watching their lives begin to unravel in real time. What had started as a simple morning coffee had turned into a public relations disaster that was spreading across the internet like wildfire. Meanwhile, Sarah had walked several blocks away, completely unaware of the firestorm brewing online. She found a quiet bench in a small park and sat down to enjoy her coffee. A light breeze rustled the leaves overhead, and birds chirped in the trees. This was exactly the kind of peaceful moment she had been craving after her deployment. Her phone buzzed with a text from her sister. "Sarah, you're viral. Someone posted a video of you in a coffee shop. Are you okay?" Sarah frowned and opened the link her sister had sent. She watched the video, Seeing herself from an outside perspective for the first time, she looked so calm in the footage, while Derek and his friends looked increasingly aggressive and foolish. The video had already been viewed tens of thousands of times and was being shared across multiple platforms. Another text came through, this time from a former teammate. Mitchell saw the video. Nice restraint. Those guys have no idea how lucky they are. You okay? Sarah replied to both messages, assuring everyone she was fine. She wasn't particularly happy about being in a viral video, but she understood the internet's fascination with the story. It had all the elements people loved. Bullies getting their comeuppance, an underestimated hero, and a dramatic reveal. Within hours, the video had been picked up by local news stations. By evening, it was on national news. Derek Morrison and his friends had become the faces of entitled arrogance, while Sarah had become an unlikely symbol of grace under pressure. Derek sat in his father's office, listening to what could only be described as the worst conversation of his life. His father, Marcus Morrison, was a successful businessman who had built their real estate empire from nothing. He was furious. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" Marcus said, his voice cold and controlled. "In one morning, you've managed to destroy relationships we've spent years building." "I've already received calls from 3 major clients saying they're reconsidering their partnerships with us. Our social media is a nightmare. We're being called every name in the book, and honestly, Derek, I can't say we don't deserve it." "Dad, I didn't mean for any of this to happen," Derek said weakly. "You didn't mean for it to be recorded," Marcus corrected, "but you absolutely meant to behave the way you did. I've heard the full audio from the security cameras that the coffee shop manager sent to the media. You were cruel, disrespectful, and completely out of line. And you did all of this to a decorated Navy SEAL who was just trying to get coffee." Derek slumped in his chair. "I apologized to her. After she had to prove her credentials to you," Marcus said sharply. "After you insulted not just her but every person who has ever served in the military. After you made yourself and this company look absolutely terrible. Your apology was too little, too late, and frankly, it didn't sound sincere." "What do you want me to do?" Derek asked, genuine fear creeping into his voice. Marcus leaned back in his chair and sighed heavily. "I want you to learn something from this. I want you to understand that the way you treat people matters. That kindness and respect aren't optional, they're essential. But first, we need to do damage control." Over the next few hours, Marcus put together a crisis management team. They crafted a public apology that Derek would need to post on all his social media accounts. They scheduled interviews where Derek would need to take full responsibility for his actions. They reached out to veterans organizations to discuss how Derek could make amends. The public apology Derek posted that evening was carefully crafted by professionals, but everyone could tell his heart wasn't really in it. The video of him reading the statement showed a man going through the motions rather than someone who truly understood the depth of his mistakes. The internet predictably tore it apart. This apology is as fake as his respect for others. He's only sorry because he got caught. Notice how he keeps saying, "if I offended anyone," instead of taking real responsibility. The situation grew worse when journalists began investigating Derek's past. Former employees came forward with stories of his difficult behavior in the workplace. Business associates shared experiences of his arrogant attitude in meetings. A pattern emerged of someone who had always treated people poorly, but had been insulated from consequences by wealth and privilege. Sarah, meanwhile, had been contacted by multiple news organizations wanting interviews. Her phone hadn't stopped ringing. Producers from morning shows, evening news programs, and even a few documentary filmmakers all wanted to talk to her. They wanted her to tell her story, to discuss what had happened, to provide commentary on Derek's behavior. She declined almost all of them. This wasn't the kind of attention she wanted or had sought. She had simply been trying to get coffee, had been forced to defend herself, and now found herself at the center of a national conversation about respect, privilege, and military service. But one request caught her attention. A veterans organization reached out asking if she would be willing to speak at an upcoming event about her experiences as one of the first female Navy SEALs. They weren't interested in the coffee shop incident. They wanted to highlight her achievements and inspire young women who might be considering military service. After thinking about it for a day, Sarah agreed. If something positive could come from this unwanted attention, it might as well be encouraging the next generation of service members. Derek's life continued to spiral downward. The real estate deal he had been so proud of fell through when his clients saw the video. They didn't want to be associated with someone who had become a symbol of arrogance and disrespect. Other business relationships followed suit. Partners began distancing themselves from him. His father seriously considered removing him from major projects until the scandal died down. Mike and Jason fared somewhat better. Mike issued a genuine apology, admitting he had been wrong to stand by while Derek harassed Sarah. He announced he would be making substantial donations to veterans organizations and would be volunteering his time to help veteran-owned businesses with their real estate needs. His apology felt sincere, and while he still faced criticism, people were more willing to accept his remorse. Jason took a different approach. He used the incident as a wake-up call to examine his own behavior and biases. He enrolled in a program that helped business leaders understand their privilege and develop empathy. He spoke openly about how he had been wrong and what he was doing to change. His honesty resonated with people, and slowly, his reputation began to recover. Derek, however, remained defensive. In private conversations with friends and family, he continued to insist that the whole thing had been blown out of proportion. He claimed he was the real victim, being destroyed by cancel culture for one small mistake. This attitude leaked to the press through people who had heard his private complaints, making things even worse for him. 3 weeks after the coffee shop incident, Derek's father called him into his office again. Marcus looked tired, years older than he had just weeks before. "Derek, I've made a decision," Marcus said heavily. "You're being removed from all client-facing roles in the company. You'll work behind the scenes on analysis and planning, but you won't represent Morrison Real Estate in any public capacity." Derek felt like he'd been punched in the stomach. "Dad, you can't be serious. This is my company too. I've worked here for 10 years. And in one morning you damaged what took us decades to build," Marcus replied. "This isn't permanent, but it is necessary. You need time to reflect on your behavior and genuinely change, not just pretend to change for the cameras." "This is so unfair," Derek protested. "I apologized. I did everything you asked me to do. What more do you want?" Marcus looked at his son with sadness. "I want you to actually mean it. I want you to understand why what you did was wrong, not just that it had bad consequences for you. I want you to develop genuine empathy for other people. Until that happens, you're a liability to this company. And honestly, you're a disappointment to me as your father." Those last words hit Derek harder than anything else. He left his father's office feeling truly alone for the first time in his life. His girlfriend had broken up with him the week before, citing his refusal to take real responsibility for his actions. His friends were keeping their distance. His professional reputation was in tatters. And now his own father was ashamed of him. Sarah's speech at the veterans event was widely praised. She spoke about the challenges of being a woman in a male-dominated field, about pushing through barriers and proving doubters wrong. She talked about the importance of service and sacrifice. She never mentioned the coffee shop incident, but everyone in attendance knew about it. They saw in her the epitome of grace and strength. After the event, a young woman approached Sarah. She looked to be about 19 or 20, with determination written across her face. "Ma'am, I just wanted to thank you," the young woman said. "I've been thinking about trying out for the SEALs, but I wasn't sure if I could do it. After hearing you speak and seeing how you handled that situation a few weeks ago, I know I have to at least try." Sarah smiled, remembering her own doubts before she had entered training. "What's your name?" "Jennifer, ma'am. Jennifer Torres." "Jennifer, the training is going to be the hardest thing you've ever done. There will be moments when you want to quit, when you think you can't go on. But if you really want it, if you're willing to push past the pain and the doubt and the fear, you can make it. Don't let anyone tell you that you can't." Jennifer's eyes welled up with tears. "Thank you, ma'am. That means everything coming from you." As Sarah watched the young woman walk away, she felt a sense of peace. The coffee shop incident had been unpleasant, but if it inspired even one person to pursue their dreams and serve their country, then perhaps it had been worth the unwanted attention. Meanwhile, Derek sat alone in his apartment scrolling through his phone. The negative comments had slowed down, but they hadn't stopped. Every few days, someone would rediscover the video and share it again, starting a new wave of criticism. He had become a cautionary tale, a meme, a symbol of everything wrong with privilege and entitlement. He watched the video of Sarah's speech at the veterans event. He listened to her talk about perseverance, about respect, about the importance of treating everyone with dignity regardless of their position or status. Everything she said felt like a direct rebuke to him, even though she never mentioned him by name. For the first time since the incident, Derek felt something shift inside him. Not defensiveness or anger or self-pity, but genuine shame. He saw, clearly, perhaps for the first time, how terribly he had behaved, how his actions had hurt not just Sarah, but his father, his company, and everyone who had ever served in the military. He realized that his apologies had been hollow because he had been apologizing for getting caught, not for what he had actually done. He had been focused on managing the consequences rather than understanding the harm he had caused. Derek closed his laptop and sat in silence, truly reflecting on his behavior for the first time. 6 months passed after the coffee shop incident. The internet had largely moved on to newer scandals and viral moments, though the video still occasionally resurfaced when people discussed examples of entitled behavior getting checked. Derek's name remained associated with the incident, a digital scarlet letter that followed him online. During those 6 months, Derek had done something he had never really done before. He listened. He read books about empathy and privilege. He attended therapy sessions where he explored why he had felt the need to dominate and belittle others. He volunteered at a veterans center, doing menial tasks like cleaning and organizing, learning to serve rather than be served. The work was humbling. Many of the veterans at the center knew exactly who he was. Some refused to interact with him. Others gave him hard stares that communicated their disapproval without words. But a few, including an older veteran named Carl who had served in Desert Storm, took Derek under their wing. "You messed up bad, son," Carl had told him during one of their first conversations. "But the question isn't whether you messed up. Everyone does at some point. The question is whether you're going to learn from it or spend the rest of your life making excuses." Derek had chosen to learn. It wasn't easy. Old habits and thought patterns kept resurfacing. He would catch himself making judgmental assumptions about people based on their appearance or job. But now at least he caught himself and questioned those assumptions. His father noticed the changes. Marcus Morrison was not an easy man to impress, but he saw genuine effort in his son for the first time in years. Derek was no longer going through the motions. He was actually working on becoming a better person. "I'm proud of you," Marcus told Derek one evening as they closed up the office together. "Not for what you did, but for how you're trying to make it right." Those words meant more to Derek than any business success ever had. Sarah had continued living her life largely outside the public eye. She had completed her leave and returned to active duty, though she had transitioned to a training role rather than active deployment. Her experience and perspective were valuable in mentoring the next generation of SEAL candidates, including several women who were attempting to follow in her footsteps. Jennifer Torres, the young woman who had approached Sarah at the veterans event, had indeed entered the SEAL training program. She was currently in the middle of the grueling qualification process, and Sarah received regular updates on her progress. Jennifer was struggling, as everyone did, but she was still in the program when many others had already quit. One afternoon, Sarah received an unexpected email. It was from Derek Morrison. The subject line read simply, "I owe you a real apology." Sarah almost deleted it without reading. She had moved on from the incident and had no desire to revisit it. But something made her open the email. Perhaps it was curiosity, or perhaps it was the same instinct that had made her such an effective SEAL. Never dismiss potential intelligence, even from unlikely sources. The email was long, but it didn't feel rambling or self-serving. Derek wrote about the past 6 months, about the work he had been doing on himself, about the things he had learned. He acknowledged specifically and without qualification every terrible thing he had said and done that morning in the coffee shop. "I was cruel," he wrote. "I was looking for someone to belittle to make myself feel important. I treated you as less than human because I had trained myself to see service workers, veterans, and anyone I perceived as ordinary as beneath me. There is no excuse for my behavior. I don't expect forgiveness, and I'm not asking for it. I simply wanted you to know that I have spent every day since then trying to become someone who would never treat another person that way again. He described his volunteer work at the Veterans Center, the conversations he had with Carl and other veterans, the things they had taught him about service and sacrifice. He wrote about meeting a veteran who had lost both legs in combat but maintained more dignity and positivity than Derek had ever possessed with all his advantages. Understand now what I couldn't see then, the email continued, that every person has a story, has value, has earned respect simply by being human. That service to others is worth more than any amount of money. That humility isn't weakness, it's strength. You showed all of those things that morning, and I showed none of them. I'm sorry, truly sorry for my behavior. You deserved better, and I failed to provide even basic human decency. Sarah read the email 3 times. She had received many messages over the months from supporters, from media, from people sharing their own stories of being disrespected. But this was different. It felt genuine in a way that Derek's public apology had not. She thought about responding, then decided against it. Derek had said he didn't expect forgiveness or a response. This email was for him, part of his journey to become better. She didn't need to be part of that journey, but she did appreciate that he had taken the time to send it. 2 months later, Sarah was at the Veterans Center for a speaking engagement when she saw a familiar face. Derek was there, wearing old jeans and a faded t-shirt, mopping the floor in one of the back hallways. He didn't see her at first, focused intently on his task. Carl, who was showing Sarah around before her speech, noticed her gaze. That's young Morrison, Carl said. He's been volunteering here for 8 months now. Does whatever we ask, never complains, and actually listens when the veterans talk to him. Can't say I ever thought I'd see the day, but people can surprise you. Has he changed? Sarah asked. Carl considered the question carefully. I think he's trying to. Real change takes time, maybe years. But the effort is real. That counts for something. Derek looked up and saw Sarah. For a moment he froze, his face cycling through surprise, embarrassment, and something that looked like genuine remorse. He set down the mop and walked over, though he kept a respectful distance. Ma'am, he said, his voice quiet. I didn't know you'd be here today. I'm speaking to some veterans who are transitioning to civilian life, Sarah explained. Derek nodded. That's good. They'll learn a lot from you. He paused, then added, I got your non-response to my email. I understand. You don't owe me anything. You sent a good email, Sarah said, surprising herself. It seemed genuine. It was, Derek replied. I meant every word. I know that doesn't fix what I did, but I needed you to know that I understood how wrong I was. They stood in awkward silence for a moment. Carl watched them both with interest, ready to intervene if necessary, but sensing that perhaps this conversation needed to happen. Carl tells me you've been volunteering here for a while, Sarah said. 8 months, Derek confirmed. I come 3 times a week, sometimes more if they need help with events or projects. It's been educational. In what way? Derek thought about how to answer. I'm learning what real strength looks like, what real sacrifice means. Everyone here has given something for others. Most of them have given everything, and they don't brag about it or use it to feel superior. They just did what needed to be done because it was right. That's something I never understood before. Sarah studied him carefully, using the same assessment skills she had developed during her years of service. She saw someone who was genuinely trying to change even if the process was incomplete. It reminded her of young SEAL candidates who came into training arrogant and were slowly broken down and rebuilt into something better. Keep working on it, Sarah said. Real change is hard, but it's possible for anyone willing to put in the effort. Thank you, ma'am, Derek said. And thank you for your service. I should have said that 8 months ago. I should have thought it every day of my life. But I'm saying it now and I mean it. Sarah nodded and walked away to prepare for her speech. Derek returned to mopping the floor, a small smile on his face. It wasn't forgiveness exactly, but it was acknowledgement. It was a recognition that he was on the right path, even if the journey was far from over. During her speech, Sarah talked about second chances and redemption. She didn't mention Derek specifically, but she spoke about how people could grow and change if they were willing to face their mistakes honestly. I've seen people at their worst, Sarah told the assembled veterans. I've also seen those same people rise above their worst moments and become something better. Change is always possible. Growth is always available. But it requires honesty, humility, and hard work. It requires admitting when you're wrong and dedicating yourself to doing better. After the speech, several veterans approached Sarah to thank her and share their own stories. Derek watched from a distance, not wanting to intrude but unable to look away. He saw how people responded to her, the respect and admiration in their eyes. He understood now what he had been too blind to see that morning in the coffee shop. That true strength wasn't about dominating others or proving superiority. It was about service, sacrifice, and the quiet dignity of doing what was right even when no one was watching. As Sarah left the center that evening, she felt a sense of completion. The coffee shop incident had been unpleasant, but it had led to unexpected outcomes. Derek was becoming a better person. Jennifer Torres was pursuing her dream of becoming a SEAL. Countless other people had been inspired by the video to stand up against disrespect and value service over status. Sometimes the worst moments created opportunities for the best outcomes. Sometimes being insulted led to important lessons being learned. And sometimes mocking a Navy SEAL was exactly the wake-up call someone needed to change their entire life. Sarah drove home looking forward to a quiet evening and a peaceful night's sleep. Tomorrow she would return to training the next generation of warriors. She would continue serving her country and inspiring others, and she would do it all without needing recognition or praise because that's what true service looked like. Derek went home that night and wrote in the journal his therapist had recommended. He wrote about seeing Sarah at the Veterans Center, about the brief conversation they had shared, about the small acknowledgement that his efforts at change were being noticed. He wrote about how far he still had to go, about the work that remained to be done on himself. The coffee shop incident would always be part of his story, a permanent reminder of who he had been and why he needed to be better. But it was no longer the end of his story. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one where he worked every day to become someone worthy of the second chance he had been given. And somewhere in that transformation, in the space between who he had been and who he was becoming, Derek finally understood what Sarah had tried to tell him that morning, that every person deserves respect, that appearances mean nothing, and that the measure of a person isn't found in their bank account or their job title, but in how they treat others when no one is forcing them to be decent. It was a lesson learned the hard way, but it was learned nonetheless, and that perhaps was the real ending to the story. Not forgiveness or redemption, but understanding. The simple, profound understanding that being human meant treating others with humanity, no matter what.